Hello and welcome back. You are listening to the Funeral Channel Network podcast, and this is the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today we are taking a pretty dense stack of research, some articles, a few tech white papers, and we're going to try to make sense of a shift, a really fundamental shift that's happening, well, right under our noses.
And it involves something that really no one gets to avoid.
It's the one experience that is universally guaranteed to every single person listening to this right now.
It is the one statistic that holds at 100%.
Yeah.
The mortality rate.
Exactly. We are talking about grief, we are talking about remembrance, and more specifically, we're looking at how those deeply human and frankly historically static experiences are colliding with the most rapidly evolving technology of our time.
Artificial intelligence?
AI. And it's a collision that I think makes a lot of people uncomfortable.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the discomfort comes from the fact that for thousands of years, our tools for grief haven't really changed, have they?
Not fundamentally, no.
We gather, we speak, we write things down on paper or, we carve them into stone, we build monuments.
We try to make things permanent.
That's the key. We try to make them static. That is the word. If you look at a pyramid or a headstone or even a printed obituary in a newspaper, the goal is always the same.
To freeze a moment in time.
Exactly. We want to say, this person existed, this is who they were, and we want to lock that definition into place so it doesn't fade away.
But the source material we're really digging into today, specifically an article titled Digital Legacies, the Evolution of AI in Remembrance and Grief. It argues that this whole static approach is actually at odds with how memory really works.
That is the core friction. That's the whole point. Grief isn't static. It's a process.
It moves.
It moves. It changes shape over the years. And our memories certainly don't stay still. I mean, the way you remember your grandfather when you're 10 years old is completely different from how you understand his life and his choices when you're 40, right?
Yeah, of course. The relationship continues to evolve.
Even though the person is gone, the relationship is still alive in you.
And yet, our artifacts,
Yeah.
the condolence card you put in a shoebox, the printed program from the service,
Yeah.
those are frozen. They're stuck in that one moment. They don't evolve with us.
Until now. And that is the entire premise of digital legacies. We are moving from an era of static archiving to an era of dynamic storytelling.
That's a big jump.
It is. The thesis here is that AI isn't just a tool for, automation or data analysis. It's becoming a medium for memory itself.
Which is a heavy concept, a medium for memory. So our mission today is to really take this apart. We aren't just going to say AI is changing funerals and just move on.
No, we have to get into the nuts and bolts of it.
We have to. We need to understand how. How can an algorithm actually curate a life story? We need to look at these things called intelligent grief companions, which I have to admit I'm pretty skeptical about.
And you should be.
And we absolutely have to look at the ethics because the potential for misuse here is, it's massive.
It is the wild west of data privacy right now. There are very few rules.
So let's start at the beginning. The first big idea in the research, the shift from snapshots to narratives.
Right.
The source material makes a really clear distinction between what it calls analog tributes and AI-curated legacies. Walk me through that distinction. Because when I think of an analog tribute, I'm just picturing a photo board at a funeral home.
And that's a perfect example. Think about the mechanics of that photo board. First, you have a physical limitation. It's only so much space, right? Maybe you can fit 20 or 30 photos.
You're lucky.
And they're all crammed together.
And then you have the time limitation. The family usually has, 48 hours to find those photos, to print them, to pin them up. And they're doing this while they're in the middle of acute shock and grief.
It's a frantic process. I've been there. You're just digging through drawers, you're scrolling through old phones, hoping you can find something good. And the end result is what the source calls a snapshot. It's a fragmented collection of moments. It's not a story. It relies entirely on the viewer, on the person looking at the board, to fill in all the gaps.
You see a picture of the deceased fishing, and you just have to assume they liked fishing.
Exactly. You see them smiling. You assume they were happy in that moment. It is a very surface-level representation of a life.
Okay, so that's the snapshot.
Yeah.
How is the AI-curated legacy different? How does it move beyond that?
The difference is twofold. The volume of data and the method of analysis. I mean, we are talking about systems that are capable of ingesting massive, truly massive data sets.
And you don't just mean a folder of photos.
No, not at all. I mean, Tens of thousands of images, years of text messages, emails, home video clips, maybe even location data from their phone, their Spotify playlists, basically their entire digital footprint.
Okay, but ingesting data is just storage, isn't it? I mean, my hard drive ingests data. That doesn't make it a narrative.
True. That's a great point. The magic, if you want to call it that, happens in the processing layer. This is where we get into things like computer vision and semantic analysis.
Okay, break that down.
So the AI doesn't just see a photo of a birthday party. It analyzes the pixel data to determine the context. It recognizes faces, yes, but it can also recognize emotion through facial microexpressions.
So it knows the difference between a real smile and a polite one.
Potentially, yes. It analyzes the lighting to determine the mood. Was this a bright, high-energy beach day or a somber, low-light evening at home? It's tagging the emotional temperature of the content.
Tagging the emotional temperature, I like that phrase. So it's gathering all these meta tags,
Yeah.
and then what?
And then it looks for patterns. This is what the source calls the curator function. A human, especially a grieving human, might miss that every single time the deceased was in nature, they were wearing the same specific hat.
Yeah.
Or that their smile was statistically wider in photos taken with their grandchildren than in photos taken at a work event. It finds these tiny, subtle correlations.
That's really interesting. So it's finding these little threads that a grieving brain would be just too overwhelmed to notice.
Precisely. It clusters these data points into themes. It moves from here is a pile of photos to here is a visual timeline of a relationship, or here's a collection of every moment he spent teaching his daughter to ride a bike.
So it builds chapters.
It automatically builds multimedia stories that can follow a narrative arc, a beginning, a middle, and a legacy.
The source mentioned something about music too, and this stood out to me because, let's be honest, funeral music is usually
Generic.
so generic. It's always Wind Beneath My Wings or some other stock song.
Because we fall back on safe, predictable choices when we're stressed and we don't have time to think. But an AI analyzing a person's Spotify history or their Apple Music can do something profoundly different.
How so?
It can identify the songs that were actually significant to that person's life, not just what they listened to the most, but what they listened to during specific periods. It can match the tempo and the key of the music to the visual narrative it has constructed.
Okay, so if the visual story is about their vibrant, chaotic college years, the soundtrack is going to match that energy.
Exactly. And if it shifts to a chapter about their quiet retirement years, the score shifts with it.
It creates what the source called a living memoriam page.
That's the term. Instead of a static date of birth and a day of death on a web page, you get a dynamic reflection of the rhythms and the substance of the life that was lived.
It turns the data into a biography rather than a resume.
It's the perfect analogy. A resume is just a list of facts. A biography is the connective tissue that gives those facts meaning.
I really like that. But I want to pump the brakes for just a second.
Okay.
Because this all sounds very high-tech and, cloud-based. But the reality of a funeral is still very physical. You have to get people into a room. You have to hand them a program.
And that physical element isn't going away. In fact, the source argues it's actually becoming more important, almost like a grounding anchor in all of this digital space.
Right. And this brings us perfectly to the second segment of the research, practical magic. The use of AI in the actual physical funeral design. And the source specifically highlights the funeral program site here as a prime example of where the industry is heading.
And the funeral program site has been a leader in this for a while, really emphasizing that the program isn't just a schedule of events, it's a keepsake. It's a tangible piece of the legacy.
But the problem has always been the barrier to entry, right? I mean, designing a professional-looking program is hard.
It's incredibly hard, especially when you have what people call funeral brain.
I know that feeling. You can't remember your own zip code, let alone figure out how to adjust the kerning on a font.
Exactly. Decision fatigue is a real documented psychological phenomenon. When you are grieving, your cognitive load is maxed out. Every single decision, no matter how small, costs you energy you simply don't have.
So how does AI step in as a design partner? Are we just talking about better templates?
It goes quite a bit beyond templates. Templates are static choices. You pick one, you fill it in. AI design is dynamic.
What does that mean, dynamic?
It means the system analyzes the text you provide, the obituary, the poems, the life story. It uses natural language processing, or NLP, to understand the sentiment and the tone of that text.
So if I write a very formal, traditional obituary, the AI knows not to suggest a neon pink layout with, like, Comic Sans font.
Precisely. It matches the aesthetic to the semantic content. If the text you've written speaks about a deep love for the outdoors and a peaceful, quiet personality, the AI might suggest a palette of earth tones, maybe some soft linen textures for the background, and a classic serif font that feels organic and timeless.
And it handles the layout.
Yes, it balances the white space for what the source calls emotional effect.
Emotional effect. That's a fascinating phrase to associate with the piece of software.
Well, it's based on decades of design psychology. Cluttered spaces create anxiety. Open, balanced spaces create a sense of calm. The AI is programmed to optimize the layout to induce that sense of calm for the reader.
So it's handling the typography, the margins, the photo resolution adjustments.
All the logistical headaches that trip people up.
It effectively removes the technical barrier then, so the family can focus on the thing that actually matters.
The content. You focus on what you want to say about your loved one. The AI handles how it looks.
And the integration here seems key.
Oh, it's seamless. You can print that physical program, which gives you something tactile and real to hold on to during the service, but it can include a QR code or maybe even an AR marker.
That links back to the digital legacy we were just talking about.
Exactly. It bridges the gap. You hold the paper in your hand, but that paper opens the door to the entire digital archive.
So it's a hybrid model.
It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
And it respects both fundamental needs, the need for a tangible physical artifact, and the need for a deep, expansive, evolving story.
Okay, so we've got the digital archive, we've got the AI-designed printed program. Now let's talk about the environment itself, the room. Segment 3 of the research, the environment of memory.
This part of the research felt very ambient. Ambient computing is the exact term for it. And we are moving away from what I call the screen on a cart model.
Oh, I know that one. The generic slideshow leaping in the corner that everyone sort of ignores after the first 5 minutes.
It just becomes wallpaper, visual noise.
It really does.
Exactly. So the source describes something different. Personalized multimedia displays that are context-aware. This involves sensors and environmental controls that are integrated within the funeral home or the memorial space itself.
Okay, give me a concrete example. What does context-aware actually look like in a viewing room?
Well, imagine a display system that's connected to the room's lighting and sound systems. It's designed to create an atmospheric pacing.
Atmospheric pacing.
So let's say it's the beginning of a visitation. People are arriving. There's a lot of greeting, talking, hugging. The energy in the room is higher. The system senses that.
Through audio levels or motion sensors?
Both. And it responds. The display might show brighter, more communal images, big group photos, celebrations, vacations. The lighting in the room is a bit warmer, and the ambient music is slightly more up-tempo.
Okay. And then as the formal service begins?
As the room settles down, the sensors detect the drop in volume and movement. The system then shifts. The lighting softens and dims. The imagery on the screen becomes more contemplative, portraits, quiet moments, landscapes. The music slows down.
So the environment is actually responding to the emotional arc of the event itself.
That's the goal. It's trying to be in sync with the people in the room.
That sounds incredible, but also, I have to ask, does it risk feeling manipulated? Like the room is trying to force me to feel a certain way?
That is a completely valid concern. And if it's done poorly, it absolutely could feel like a theme park ride. It could feel creepy.
Right.
But if it's done well, it should be almost invisible. You shouldn't consciously notice it. It should just feel right.
Right.
The goal is simply to create a container for grief that feels organic and supportive, not jarring or mechanical.
The source also mentioned responsiveness to visitor interaction. This sounded a bit more active, less passive.
This is where it gets technically very complex and, frankly, enters some ethically gray areas.
I was going to say, this sounds like facial recognition.
It could be. Or RFID tagging and name tags, though that raises a whole host of privacy concerns we need to get to. But in theory, the display could recognize that the immediate family is standing in front of it versus, say, a distant colleague from work.
And it changes what it shows based on who is there.
It could. If the grandchildren approach the screen, it could automatically create a microtribute of photos and video clips featuring them with the deceased. It personalizes the memory for that specific viewer in that moment.
It's validating. It's the room saying, your specific relationship mattered, we see you.
That's a great way to put it. It moves the entire experience from a simple broadcast, here's the life of the deceased, to a conversation, here's your connection to the deceased.
From broadcast to conversation. That's a really strong distinction. And it actually leads us perfectly into the next segment, which is entirely about conversation.
Yeah.
But conversation with.
Well, with a machine.
The empathic machine.
This is the part of the research notes where I literally wrote in the margins, is this healthy? We are talking about intelligent grief companions, AI chatbots designed to help you mourn.
And your skepticism is completely warranted. A lot of people have that same gut reaction. But we need to understand what these tools are actually doing and what they're not.
Okay.
We aren't talking about a customer service bot that asks you for your order number. We're talking about large language models, LLMs, that have been specifically fine-tuned on psychological principles in grief counseling literature.
So it's not just scanning for keywords like sad or miss.
Not at all. It uses natural language processing to understand nuance, metaphor, and emotional subtext. The source describes capabilities like active listening and something called cognitive reframing. Break down cognitive reframing for me. That's a therapy term, isn't it? How on earth does a piece of code do that?
It is a therapy term. Cognitive reframing is the practice of identifying a negative or stuck thought pattern and then offering a different, more helpful perspective.
Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say you are using a grief companion app. You type in, I feel so guilty that I wasn't there when he took his last breath. I feel like I failed him.
A very heavy and very common thought for grieving people.
Incredibly common. A basic chatbot might just say, I am sorry you feel that way. That's sympathy, but it's not particularly helpful. It doesn't move you anywhere.
Right, it's a dead end.
But an AI trained in cognitive reframing might analyze that statement and reply with something like, it sounds like you are carrying a very heavy burden for that one specific moment. But as you look back at the last year of his life, can you tell me about the moments where you were there for him?
It's pivoting the lens. It's forcing you to look at the wider picture, not just that one painful snapshot.
It prompts you to retrieve evidence that contradicts your feeling of guilt. It helps you construct a more balanced and realistic narrative of your caregiving. It's not fixing the grief, but it is helping you navigate the cognitive distortions that come along with it.
But, and I have to ask this, can a machine actually replace the human element, the empathy? Because if I'm pouring my heart out to an algorithm, isn't there always a part of me that knows it's just math? It doesn't actually care.
That's the empathy gap. And you're absolutely right. The AI does not feel. It simulates care based on the data it was trained on. And for many people, that simulation will always feel hollow. It just won't work for them.
So what's the argument for it then?
The source makes a crucial point about accessibility.
The 3.0 AM problem.
Precisely. Grief doesn't stick to business hours. Your therapist isn't available at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when you wake up from a nightmare. Your friends and family might be exhausted from supporting you, or they might be asleep. The AI is always there.
It's a constant.
It provides what therapists call a holding space that is judgment-free and, most importantly, immediate. You don't have to wait.
So it's a stopgap, a supplement.
It's a supplement. The source emphasizes this repeatedly, and it's a critical point. These are tools, not replacements for human connection or clinical therapy. They are intelligent grief companions, not grief solvers.
And they can do things a human can't, I suppose.
In some ways, they can track your emotional state over time if you use it like a journal. They can recognize patterns like, I notice you seem to struggle most on Sunday evenings, and then suggest specific, tailored coping mechanisms.
Which is actually more than a friend might be able to do. A friend sees you in the moment. The AI sees the data trend over months.
Right. It's a difference between a hug and a chart. Sometimes you desperately need the hug, and sometimes you need the chart to help you understand why you feel like you're drowning. This technology can, in theory, offer the chart.
But this brings us to the elephant in the room, a very large, data-hungry elephant. If we are feeding this machine our deepest, darkest thoughts, if we are uploading terabytes of our family's entire history, who owns that? Where does it go?
And that is segment 5, the ethical landscape. And this is where the water gets incredibly murky.
The source lists consent and privacy as the #1 concern. And it's not just about, your data getting hacked. It's about the fundamental right to your own digital afterlife.
Think about the raw material we discussed earlier, all those voice recordings, all those text messages. If you take your grandmother's voicemails and you use them to train an AI to speak in her voice, did she consent to that?
No, probably not, because the technology didn't even exist when she was alive.
Exactly. We're retroactively applying brand new technology to old lives. This raises the huge issue of informed consent. Families are making these incredibly intimate decisions for the deceased, and then you have the data security aspect. Who hosts this living memoriam? Is it a private for-profit company? What happens if that company goes bankrupt?
Does the data just disappear?
Mm.
Or what happens if they change their terms of service and suddenly they can sell that data to advertisers?
We noticed your grandfather liked fishing based on his photos. Here are some ads for base boats.
That is the dystopian nightmare scenario, the commodification of grief.
It is. And the source argues that transparency has to be completely non-negotiable. Companies operating in this space have to be radically, painfully clear about how data is stored, who can access it, for how long, and what happens to it at the end of a contract.
And then there's the other side of the ethical coin, the uncanny valley. We touched on this with the idea of voice recreation.
Authenticity versus simulation. This is a deeply personal, subjective line. For some people, hearing an AI-generated message in the voice of a lost loved one is a miracle. It brings closure. It feels like one last visit.
And for others?
For others, it feels like a profound violation. It feels like a ghost in the machine. It's uncanny. It's so close to human, but just slightly off, and that tiny gap creates a sense of revulsion or even horror.
It's the difference between a fond memory and a digital zombie.
That's a harsh way to put it, but it's accurate for how some people feel. And the verdict from the source is that there is no one-size-fits-all answer here. It depends entirely on the individual's psychology, their culture, the nature of their loss. What heals one person might deeply traumatize another.
Which means the user, the grieving family, has to have absolute granular control. They need to be able to turn it on, turn it off, and delete it forever if they want to.
Control is the antidote to the uncanny. If you choose to engage with it, it can be healing. If it is forced upon you, it's intrusive and disturbing.
Okay, let's pivot for a moment to a more universally positive application of this tech. Because while the grease bot is clearly controversial, the idea of connectivity seems pretty universally good.
Segment yes, connecting families across space. And this really addresses the reality of the modern family. We are scattered all over the globe.
I have family in 3 different time zones on 2 different continents. We don't all live in the same village anymore.
And that means our memories are scattered, too. You have photos of your mom on your phone. Your brother has physical albums in his attic 2 states away. Your aunt has all these amazing stories in her head that she's never written down.
So how does AI fix the diaspora of memory?
Through what the source calls shared memory platforms. Imagine a secure cloud-based system that acts as a central repository for the entire family. But again, it's not just a digital shoebox or a Dropbox folder. The AI acts as the weaver.
The weaver. I like that image. It's active.
It is. It takes the photo you uploaded from a family reunion in 1995 and the story your aunt in another country wrote about that same holiday dinner in 1995 and maybe a scanned recipe card your cousin found from that meal. It links them. It understands these 3 things belong together.
It finds the intersection points that no single person might remember.
Yes. It creates a coherent, multi-layered narrative out of all these scattered fragments. It allows for what the source calls curating the collective. Instead of everyone grieving in their own private silo with their own little piece of the puzzle, the AI helps the family assemble the whole puzzle together.
That has huge implications for future generations. My great-grandkids won't just see a name on a family tree. They could potentially see this multidimensional, interactive tapestry of a life.
And it also democratizes the history. The source uses the term democratizing remembrance, and a big part of that is accessibility.
Language translation, for instance.
That's a huge part of this. If half the family speaks Spanish and the other half speaks English, the AI can translate the tributes, the stories, and even the captions on videos in real time. And crucially, modern AI can do this while preserving the tone and the emotional nuance.
So a joke stays a joke.
And a heartfelt sentiment stays heartfelt. It ensures that language isn't a barrier to shared grief and remembrance.
The source mentioned adaptive interfaces too.
Yes, this is critical. Things like built-in screen readers for family members who are visually impaired, automatic subtitling for all videos for the hard of hearing, and simplified, clean navigation for older users who might not be as tech-savvy.
The goal is to make sure that no one is excluded from the memorial experience because they can't use the technology.
The tech should bend to the user, not the other way around. It has to be inclusive.
So we've looked at the past with the archives, the present with the service and the grief support and the connection with the network. Where does this leave us? What is this hybrid future the research talks about?
Segment 7. This is the synthesis of everything. And the source is very, very clear on this point. We are not looking at a replacement of tradition. We are looking at augmentation.
So the funeral director is not being replaced by a robot.
Absolutely not. The human touch remains central and irreplaceable. The hug at the door, the handshake, the simple act of gathering in a physical space, Those are biological needs. We're mammals. We need to be physically together when we hurt.
But the tools surrounding that gathering are changing fundamentally.
It's a concept the source calls layered remembrance. Think of the traditional funeral service as the base layer. It is the physical, temporal anchor. And in that layer, you have the printed program, again, looking to the standards set by places like the funeral program site, providing that tangible history you can hold.
Okay, so that's the base layer. What gets layered on top of that?
You overlay the digital. You have the AI-generated legacy page that people can explore on their phones before and after the service. You have the interactive atmospheric displays in the lobby. And you have things like the guest book analytics.
Okay, that was a term in the research that caught my eye. Analytics for a guest book. What does that even mean?
Well, instead of just a book with a list of signatures, imagine a digital guest book where the AI visualizes the community of support. It might show a map of the world with pins indicating where everyone traveled from to be there.
Oh, that's powerful.
It might generate a word cloud of the most common sentiments written in the book. You'd see words like kindness, humor, generosity in big, bold letters. It visualizes the impact of the life.
That's actually really validating for a family, to see the shape of the impact, not just a list of names.
And there's also the idea of AI-facilitated storytelling prompts. This solves the writer's block problem we all have at funerals. You stand at the guest book, pen in hand, and your mind just goes blank.
So you end up writing, "Sorry for your loss."
Right, the same generic phrase. But imagine the digital guest book prompts you with a specific question. John was famous for his practical jokes. Do you have a favorite story about a prank he pulled?
That immediately unlocks a specific memory. It gives you a starting point.
Exactly. It gently coaxes the specific, vibrant stories out of the guests, and suddenly the family has a rich collection of unique personal anecdotes instead of a book full of the same 3 condolences repeated over and over.
It deepens the reservoir of memory for the family.
That is the entire philosophy of future remembrance in a nutshell. The tools are there to amplify emotional nuance and strengthen human connection. As the source concludes, AI in this space is not about novelty for novelty's sake. It is about meaning.
It's about giving us better, sharper, more intuitive tools to do the ancient work we've been doing for 10,000 years.
Correct. The work of remembering.
This has been, wow, a lot to process. I feel like I'm looking at my own phone differently now. It's not just a device, it's a future archive in my pocket.
It is the raw material of your legacy, whether you're thinking about it that way or not.
Let's just recap quickly before we close out. We've covered the fundamental shift from static snapshots of memory to these dynamic AI-woven narratives.
We discussed how AI can act as a design partner, easing the logistical and emotional burden of things like creating funeral programs. We talked about responsive environments that literally hold space for us.
We debated the empathic machine and the complicated role of AI in ongoing grief support, along with the massive ethical minefield of privacy, consent, and authenticity.
And we looked at how these tools can connect scattered families and create this hybrid future of what the source calls layered remembrance.
So here's the final thought I want to leave you, the listener, with. And this is something to really chew on as you go about your day.
Let's hear it.
We spend so much time and energy curating our lives online, don't we? We filter our photos, we carefully edit our captions, we are constantly trying to project a certain image of ourselves.
The highlight reel.
The highlight reel, exactly.
Yeah.
But if an AI were to analyze your entire data footprint today, not just the Instagram highlights, but the texts, the search history, the deleted drafts, the late-night Spotify playlists, what story would it tell about you?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Would it identify the theme you think you were living? Or would it find a different pattern, a different story hidden in the data? Are you, right now, living the legacy you want the algorithm to one day tell?
It forces you to think about authenticity in a whole new way.
It sure does. As we move into this future, we aren't just living for the moment. We are actively feeding the system that will remember us. Make sure you're giving it good data.
Indeed.
Thank you for listening to this deep dive on the Funeral Channel Network podcast. We'll be back next time with another topic. Until then, take care of your legacy.